And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Inframan, Allison Cook, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so very much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight I have returning to the show, Wren Collier.
Hey everyone.
With a little delay. And Taylor Bell. Hey Taylor.
Hello.
And you've been a listener to the show for a while, and you have some interesting stuff you're working on.
Yeah, I think I've been listening since 2013 or 2014, something like that.
So very early on.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, well, you started the show in, what was it, 2012? Or?
Beginning of 2013.
Oh, okay. I must have caught it like a year in then.
So
nice.
You're doing, you've made your own tarot deck.
Yeah, I last 3 years I've been working on a deck of tarot cards that are a little bit different from kind of the average set of tarot cards in that they're exclusively sigils. So it's called the Sigil Arcanum. And basically, I guess the goal was to take the core symbols from the Thoth tarot and sort of compress them into individual sigils. And use those as the frontispieces for all the cards.
Huh. They look beautiful.
Thanks.
If people want to look at them, you want to give them the website?
Yeah. Yeah. All the cards are available on sigilarcanum.com, which is sigilarcanum.com. And you just scroll down a little bit. There's pictures of every card.
Yeah. Yeah, and you actually have the deck made now.
Yep.
Okay.
Finally got it printed. It took a while. It was an involved process, as I think Wren can attest to.
Yeah. Taylor had a really successful Kickstarter campaign for the deck, and I was one of the backers on that campaign. So, yeah, I have my deck. It's a really beautiful tarot deck. I mean, Taylor's really knocked it out of the park with it. Like in particular, I've got the colored one. There's a really neat black and white one, like too, that I think people should check out. But I wanted the color, so I got the colored one.
Thank you. That's very flattering. That is the thing about the deck, is there's two versions of it. I designed it originally to be all black on black, so it's like UV glossy kind of spot printed on top of matte black paper. So it gives this really interesting look when you hold it in the light. But I have a friend who's a tarot reader, and I brought the deck to him and showed it to him and stuff. And he liked it, but he said, I cannot read this. There's no colors. And I'm like, oh, all right. Well, let me go back and add the colors. And luckily, in a lot of these magical systems and symbolic systems, a lot of the symbols have colors associated with them.
Right.
So I borrowed those colors and kind of made a rainbow deck.
Nice. What is the process for making a tarot deck? Is there like a company that makes them?
So there's a few companies. There's like United States Game Systems, Llewellyn publishes some, Los Carabeo. What I did was a little unorthodox. I reached out to a couple of these companies and didn't get any responses. So what I ended up doing was I ran a Kickstarter, like Wren mentioned. We raised a little over $30,000, which covered the cost of printing, assembly, and shipping. And so then I got it all printed locally here in Minnesota, over in Northeast or Dinkytown, kind of by the U of M. There's a shop called Midland Paper, and Midland was able to handle putting everything together, sourcing the vendors, figuring out the paper, figuring out the printing. So they took care of me. They got it all figured out. There were some hiccups along the way. The first print shop that was dealing with the decks ended up screwing up the black decks three separate times over the course of 6 months, or I guess it was almost a year. And eventually we kind of got to an agreement, a point where we said, okay, let's try it one more time. We've got all the variables figured out. This is what we're doing. We've got it down. And after a month of delaying, that company bailed on the project.
Oh.
So Midland swooped in to save the day. They found another print shop in the area, and those folks took care of me. They got it all printed. They actually delivered it to. Everything's over at my mom's house because my house doesn't have any space. So it's all in my mom's basement. Thankfully, I don't have to live in my mom's basement, but
Nice. So how big are the cards?
Standard tarot card size. They're 4 3/4 tall by 2 3/4 wide. So same as you'd find like a Rider-Waite pack. It's pretty much a standard size U.S. game systems uses.
Ah, okay. And what got you interested in making your own tarot deck?
Oh man, it was actually kind of an accident. So I was doing card games and board games at the time, working with a couple people in the area, trying to figure out, what are some fun games? How can we design, good stuff that's going to be new and exciting for the market and make a name for ourselves. And there's a group in Wisconsin called the Game Crafter that every year, I think barring last year and this year, they host a convention down by Mall of America. So we showed up to it, and they have a table full of basically just free items. So you're talking like dice, tiles, cards, all kinds of stuff that you can use to make games, like handmade games. So I went and I snagged, I think 100 cards, just like poker-sized cards. Brought them home. I was planning to do something with them, thinking about making I think it was a zombie survival board game. So sort of like Left 4 Dead or 7 Days to Die, but in a board game form. Mm. And that never really happened. But what I did was, I had this deck of cards sitting on my shelf for a few weeks. And I looked over at them one day and I thought, you know what? I could use those to make some flashcards for learning the Thoth Tarot, because that's what I was doing at the time was, studying the Thoth, trying to figure out like what symbols are in each of these cards. How do they work? How do they map to each other? What are the connections there? And just started writing down all the symbols for each card. And it got to, I think it was the tower, that I had drawn out this little glyph representing the tower, and I really liked the way it looked. So I was inspired, and I decided I'm going to try to turn this into a full deck. And I did.
Obviously. All right.
So what draws you to the Thoth Tarot versus, like a, Marseille deck or a more standard tarot deck?
Sure. That's a pretty good question. I've never been able to read the Marseille because the pips are so boring. Mm-hmm. I totally appreciate and have a lot of respect for people who can read that deck, partially because it is the older of all three of those decks. Mm-hmm. But I just never liked the pips. I just never got into that or really the style. I started out with the Rider-Waite, actually. That was the first thing I learned how to read. And what I like about that deck is that all of the cards, even the minor arcana, the small cards, they each have kind of scenes, right? Like fully depicted scenes with people doing stuff. So you can point to the people and you can say, this card means this and this and this because here it is. You can see it right there. The Thoth is a little more challenging. It doesn't have scenes, but it's also not just pips. It's sort of a halfway in between thing where they're kind of like pips. Each card, each of the minors has, let's say the 7 of Cups. It's got 7 cups on it. Yeah, but it doesn't have people like the Rider-Waite would. But it also has elements of the art that, and I think both of you guys are familiar with the Thoth. If anyone else out there isn't, definitely go check out some images because it's a gorgeous deck.
Yeah.
And each of those minors have elements of the art that reflect the energy of the card. So like the 7 of Cups is debauch, and it's the card itself is very green and oozing and like caustic and acidic looking. And that kind of depicts some of the energy that you can find in that card, versus the 6 of Cups, for instance, has a lot more of a fun, bright, kind of curvy feel to it. And that card is pleasure. So feeling those emotions through the visuals, I guess, was what drew me to it.
Yeah, I've always preferred the Thoth deck.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I like what Crowley did reordering it a bit too.
Yeah, there's some major differences in terms of what card order. There's some major changes from the center deck.
So did you follow that with your deck as well?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So the biggest one is the swapping of strength and justice, which become lust and adjustment. But I think in the rider weight, strength is 8, but in the Thoth, lust is 11. So they flip position. Justice becomes adjustment, and that goes from 11 to 8. And there's some pretty good reasoning for it too. And I couldn't tell you exactly what it is, but it has to do with the way that when you lay out all the zodiac signs for each of the cards, they're in a particular order. And in the rider weight, there's one twist, essentially. I think that's how it goes. There's one twist on one side, but the other side is not twisted. So it's like, it's a really kind of visual thing, and I don't know how to explain it very well, but Crowley decided, I'm going to twist it. I'm going to flip these two things and try to put that order back together how he thinks it should have been.
Right.
And I personally, I don't know. I mean, I read with the rider weight and the Thoth when I do readings, and I feel like it doesn't really matter that much. Like, yeah, I think that there's some good reasoning to it, but I think that a lot of it's subjective.
Yeah. Well, Crowley was a big gematria head, right? So he wanted it to fit a certain gematria value. And I mean, 11 in particular is the value of abracadabra. So it kind of ties the idea of like lust and magic being intertwined.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That makes sense. I never really thought about how much he was playing with the numbers, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's funny that like you're really into the Thoth deck, but you're not a Thelemite like me. So it's like, and I don't really use the Thoth deck, and I'm a big Crowley head. So like the deck I end up coming back to the most is actually a variant of the Marseille deck, the Swiss 1JJ deck.
Okay.
Which it's the only deck I own that I've. There's the whole like thing in tarot, right? Like you're supposed to use decks that you've been gifted or given by someone. And it's the only deck that I've been given by someone, like it was a present, and it's just the deck I always end up using. Like I've got plenty of decks, but I always go back to the Swiss 1JJ, and it is tough with the Marseille decks because the pip cards are just very plain. Like they don't really have any information or scenes on them, not like the Rider-Waite deck.
Yep.
The 6 wands just has 6 wands on it, so it can be a little difficult, but it has some different things too, like some differences from the standard Rider-Waite deck that a lot of people are familiar with, like how the like instead of the tower, it's the house of God, and like
interesting.
Yeah, there's like some little small changes. Like I mean, people who are familiar with the Marseille would recognize the changes, but it's an interesting deck. I like it a lot. Very, very vintage feeling. I think the deck's from like the 70s.
Okay.
Can you guys define pip for people too?
Yeah. So you want to take that?
No, go for it.
Yeah. So a pip card is any card that's not part of the major arcana. So when people think of tarot, they think of, the major arcana cards, the named cards like the Tower or the Chariot or the Magician or the Fool, the Hanged Man, like those cards, like any card that's outside of that are pip cards. It's sort of similar. Pip cards are kind of like what people think of as like traditional playing cards, right? Like they're numbered from 1 to 10, I believe. Yeah, and then you have like a king and queen and like a knight, and also a page, or am I getting that mixed up?
Yeah, no, you got it. Or if you're Crowley, you just mess the whole system up and do prince, princess, queen, and knight, and then your kings are knights, but they're kings, but they're not kings. I don't know. It gets very confusing. But yeah, I guess the way I look at pips is being. I sort of just see them as the 2 through 10, the 2 through 10. So I look at them as the cards that have individual icons on them. So like when you're talking about poker decks, The aces kind of all have their ornate big symbol in the middle, which is a pip for sure. But then you see like the 2 or the 6 or the 9 or whatever, and they all have these very standardized looking symbols in a certain quantity. And that's how I've always thought about the pips. But I guess, I don't know, because the court cards are kind of their own thing, but they're also part of the minors.
Yeah.
It depends on who you ask, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like you could break them up into 3 different sections.
Yeah, or 4 if you want to separate the aces too.
True.
So Wren, actually, I was curious, how do you use the Marseille, like especially for the minors? Do you just kind of have each of the meanings memorized, or do you do like mathematical stuff with it? What process do you use?
Some of it memorized, some of it just I have a little reference booklet I have to refer to. I'm really bad at tarot. Just as a disclaimer to people, it's not usually the divination form that I most go to. I'm more of a geomancy nerd.
Nice,
but I do like tarot, and I occasionally use it. It's more fun at parties to do tarot readings. Most people don't get geomancy. It's not flashy enough for people. So
that's a good point.
Yeah. So I mean, for the most part, some of it's just memorized, right? I just know it from doing it. And then some of it's I just reference a little booklet that comes with the deck.
Nice. That's good to know. That gives me some hope.
Yeah. To anybody out here who's listening, who's interested in doing tarot, you should memorize all the cards, but you don't have to memorize all of them to do tarot. It's a process. Yep. It takes a long time. It's like learning a second language.
And don't listen to anybody who's trying to shame you for using a booklet. Everybody uses a booklet when they're learning. Everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Now, unless you're doing it like every day, it's you're not going to memorize this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So, do you use tarot for divination, Taylor?
I do. So I give tarot readings at Magus Books, which is a local bookstore, every Sunday from 12 to 6. And I just started doing that in January. And for years, I did my own tarot readings. I would give myself tarot readings. For some reason, that stopped working recently. I don't know why, but every time I've tried to give myself a reading this year, it's just fallen apart, and I don't know how to read it.
Huh.
Which is very strange. I've heard of that. I've heard of people having that situation, but I don't know.
How is it falling apart? In the sense that the interpretations aren't making any sense, or that the it's not being predictive enough? It's not matching what actually happens.
I think it's that my expectations are getting in the way.
Oh. Yeah.
If I'm reading somebody else, if I throw cards down, I can kind of, so much of doing a reading for somebody is cold reading, and understanding where they're at in their life, trying to kind of guess about them.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know myself too well, I guess, or maybe I don't know myself enough or something. I don't know. I throw the cards down and I expect to see one thing, and I see cards that I'm totally not expecting. And I'm like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
And, it's really specifically, there was a situation recently where, so I mentioned, we were talking a little bit ago about houses. I'm looking at trying to find a new house at some point. And I had done a reading about it, and I was sitting there looking at the cards, and I'm just I was exhausted. I was totally beat, and I just could not come up with anything. And so I put it away, and I had somebody else do the reading for me. I was like, here, help me out with this. Here's my situation. Just throw some cards down and tell me what you see. And it was a lot more helpful.
I mean, so do you, I guess you kind of answered that question. So you do computational divination, right? Where it's less a therapy session and more you need an answer about something, right? Should I be doing this? What do I have to watch out for?
I do both. It depends on the person's needs, I guess. Some people will come to me with specific questions. They're saying like, I've been working at this job for X number of years and I feel the urge to get out of it. Like, what do I do? And I'll lay down some options and say, okay, if you do this, this could happen. Or if you do this, this other thing could happen. I always give the caveat. Personally, I don't believe that tarot is a guarantor of the future. I think that the future is very mutable. And what I see it as is a way to sort of look at what the future could possibly be from right now. If the common line is if things stay the way they are, and I don't think things ever stay the way they are, but I think it's a way to guess at the future, if that makes sense.
And why do you think cards are something that we can use to determine the future at all? I mean, we're pulling them kind of randomly.
That's a very good question. Gosh, I don't have a good answer for you. Let me try to pull one out of thin air real quick. So I think that cards, even though they're random, I think that the archetypes on them are meaningful enough that we can map our situations to them. And on the other side of it, I've seen other people do readings that have been so dead on accurate that I believe that it works. And I think that believing that it works helps make it work. As crazy as that might sound.
No, that's not crazy at all.
I used to get a flash, like when I do tarot readings, I do them a little differently. I'll flip through the deck from, the back of the cards until one of them stands out to me, and then I put that card out, and then I continue to do that. And then I get generally fairly accurate readings. Even if I can't interpret them at first, when I look back at them, I go, oh yeah, that made sense.
Interesting.
So, like, I even had one with the whole pandemic, which I think had both the Tower and the Hermit right next to each other.
Oh, there you go.
And it's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense now, But the thing with it, I used to get a flash of red when I had the right card.
Ooh, interesting.
What do you mean? Like, what did it look like?
Like, my vision would just, like, someone flashed a red light.
Like your whole vision?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then it just stopped, and it doesn't happen anymore. And I really missed that because it was, like, just a sure set thing where, like, I'd flip, to the next card, I'd get a flash of red and be like, all right, that one.
That's interesting.
So I don't know why it doesn't happen anymore. But a lot of this stuff, a lot of weird psychic stuff I've had over the years, like, it changes. It doesn't, like, the stuff doesn't stay the same.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because, like, your expectations about how it's supposed to work change, or like, gosh, yeah, I have no idea. That's really interesting.
Like, I don't need that method anymore. I don't know. I don't do as many tarot card readings anymore either.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it could be that. It could be it's almost like the way that you believe something about it, the way that you perceive what it is has changed, or maybe because, like, for instance, if you're seeing red and you sort of associate that with that being something meaningful or kind of standing out, like, maybe that's not really what the red is supposed to mean. So when you start associating it with that kind of locks itself into your brain, and then the thing that it was supposed to be doing doesn't happen anymore. I don't know. I'm no idea.
Yeah, I don't really know either. I mean, it was just a weird thing I noticed after a while. Like, I kept getting these red flashes when it was the right card, and it went on for years, and then it just stopped. And I still get, like I said, when I do them, I still get pretty accurate readings as long as I feel connected to the cards. But I also feel like the way I'm doing it's a little less random.
How so?
Because I'm not just shuffling it and then laying out the cards. I'm flipping through them from behind until a card feels right and then pulling it out. And even though I don't know what card it is, on some level I may know what card it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep. That's interesting.
I mean, that lack of computational accuracy is the one reason that I don't do tarot as much, because a lot of times if I need to do divination, it's because I need concrete, specific answers about, what's going to happen if this set of conditions continues, right? And that's why, I don't know. not trying to make this into a geomancy podcast, but at some point I'm gonna have to like get you doing geomancy, Taylor, because I think you dig it. And
I've been starting to do it.
Oh, awesome! Yeah.
Well, I actually wanted you to talk a little about geomancy and how it's different and why you like it more.
Yeah, geomancy is very precise. Like, first of all, there's only, I think, like 16 possible characters in geomancy. And so the combination of all like the different geomantic figures is much more limited than the possible combinations you can get with tarot.
And what are you using?
So you can do geomancy in a number of ways, right? In the ancient past, you would basically take a stick and just kind of like tap it into the ground a random number of times. And you would do this, you'd make like 4 rows of dots. So you basically just like make holes in the ground and then just stop at a certain point when it felt right. And then you move on, do another row, stop when it felt right. And so you'd end up with 4 rows of, random number of dots. And if it was, if the number of dots was even, you would put, you basically build the character out of whether the rows are odd or even, right? So each geomantic figure is made up of 4 rows of either 1 dot or 2 dots, right? So you could have 2 dots, 2 dots, 1 dot, 1 dot, and that would be one figure. You could have 1 dot, 1 dot, 2 dots, 1 dot, and that would be another figure, which is like puer. And each figure has its own name and like sort of a specific character and can mean a very specific thing under, the circumstances. Like you build 4 of these. There's different ways to do it. Like you can build different types of charts. One of the most popular one is a shield chart, where you use the 4 sort of base figures that you make. You use that to make another row, and then you use those to make another row, and then you use those to make what were called the witnesses, or like the kind of final 2 characters, and then you have the judge, which is the last character. And all of these different permutations are like mathematically linked to each other. I feel like if you're like into like math and coding and stuff, geomancy has a particular appeal to it. Like not only does it work on base 2, so if you're like familiar with your powers of 2, all the numbers make a lot of sense. And just the way it kind of it permutates and encrypts itself as the chart develops is really fascinating to me. And geomancy offers very specific answers. Like there's not a lot open to interpretation like in tarot. Like geomancy will give you specific answers to questions. And so it's good for deterministic or binary outcomes. Like, should I marry this person? Should I take a trip next Wednesday? And what's interesting is that like in the past, like during the Renaissance, geomancy was the main form of divination. Like tarot was tarot was a lot less common and originally was just a card game.
Right.
Geomancy was geomancy and astrology, right? And geomancy, as like Stephen Skinner, like he wrote a whole book on geomancy called Terrestrial Astrology. It's the astrology of the Earth, right? And then you have the other side of it, which is astrology using the stars. And those are your 2 like main predictive divination methods that are actually like computational in nature, right? Like, and they give you specific answers to questions. Tarot's great. I love tarot. I love reading tarot for people, but it always feels a little imprecise and leaves a lot open for interpretation.
But if you're
too, yeah.
But if you're making the holes and stuff with the geomancy, isn't that sort of like, aren't you kind of consciously making that to some degree?
Well, there's 2 ways you can do that. So like with the dots, like for a modern example, the dots would be to take a piece of paper, right, and just make a random number of dots with a pen. Mm-hmm. You can actually, though, like my preferred method of geomancy, like to generate your 4 characters, is to use dice. So I roll 4 dice, and if it's and just keep track of whether or not it's odd or even. And the 4 dice I use are color coded, so I know like which part of the which part of the figure that they are in, so like the order and stuff. But you can actually use anything. You need a random number generator, just any way to generate random numbers. You just need a way to do like odd. You could flip a coin too. That also would work because you're just looking for, odd or even.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I've been using recently I've been using the pencil on paper method with, doing the dots, but I started out with sticks, which was, pretty easy. It's pretty similar to flipping a coin.
Yeah.
But really quick side note, you mentioned that tarot started as a card game. It is a very fun card game. It's also incredibly convoluted.
I've never actually played Soroki. Is it like, have you played like the actual game?
Yeah, I played it a few times. It's 3 versus 1. It's like an asymmetrical game where one person is sort of like placing a bet, and then all the other people are betting against them and working together to kind of like foil their plan. It's interesting, and it's what is it called? It's a trick-taking game, right? So you're making pairs, and you want to like get the most points, basically.
Interesting. Why do you think divination works at all?
Oh man. I think it works because we trust our intuition and our imagination. And I think that part of it is I'm a pretty firm believer that everything has spirit in some form or fashion. I think that the art itself has spirit, and that doesn't have to be paintings. It could be, sigils in the case of the Sigil Arcanum, or, dots in the case of geomancy. That art carries with it sort of a creative energy that I think when it mixes with us and our imagination and our expectations and beliefs, it kind of does something, and then we take that something and we interpret it in a subjective way. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work, right?
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. I haven't done too much experimentation with geomancy. And Wren, do you ever have geomantic readings that don't work?
It usually works. I actually can't think of an example where it wasn't pretty predictive.
Okay.
But it's not like you said, it's not immutable, right? It's like a determination of what the most probable outcome if nothing else has changed, right? It's like the same deal with astrology.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't mean that this is going to happen if you make changes and you like work around it or work towards a different outcome. But if nothing else considered, if you do nothing else and let things just fall as they may, this is the probable outcome.
Yeah,
right.
And it's useful. I mean, people use it for a lot of very practical reasons, right? Like, it's a party trick, sure, but it's also something that you can rely on for some things. You can kind of turn to it when you're in a moment of desperation, or if you just want a second opinion, you can kind of turn to tarot or turn to geomancy or Lenormand or whatever you want and find some kind of answers. And then it's up to you whether you trust it or not.
I think with tarot, I like the fact that it's so open to interpretation. Because I'll get a reading and what I'm picking up from the reading may not be what the card, like the descriptor of the cards actually is, but it'll make sense to me when I look at the cards, if that makes sense. It's hard to exactly explain. Like, I'll get a sense of what this reading means. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And I'll record that. And then later when I go back, I'll be like, yep, that was right. Okay. And I don't know if that's just, if it's just a channel for my subconscious to kind of like come forward a little bit. Like, it already knows what's going to happen, and that's how I'm finding out.
Yeah, and there's like a feeling that you're kind of getting at there, which, like, when you see the symbols or you see the meaning of the cards and you have that intuitive kind of, yes, this is it, and I know that this is it, that I see a lot with when I read clients at Magus. I'll put out a bunch of cards and I'll explain what I'm seeing and kind of, and again, like I said earlier, part of it is cold reading, right? So you're kind of bending things to fit the person and sort of help them interpret it in their own kind of subjective understanding of those archetypes. But then inevitably, what always seems to happen is the person, breaks down crying because, yeah, it's so profound to them that this is so accurate and it's so aligned with what they feel in their heart about whatever the situation is.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only person with that experience of doing readings and making people cry.
Oh, there's a reason we keep tissues right next to the reader station. It's it's a common occurrence, and every time people are like embarrassed about it, and I'm like, no, don't worry, that means it's working.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
I found a lot of times when I do readings for people, the cards tell them uncomfortable things, like things that they were maybe not taking care of, or things about themselves that they were hiding. A lot of times the cards will bring out secrets in people. And I think that's a fascinating aspect of it, right? Because it's not entirely cold reading. Sometimes the cards are saying things about people that you don't know. And that, you pick up on their reaction to it, and you can kind of gauge like, oh, well, this must be important to them. And you can put the clues together if they're not being forthright about it. But like, I've had that happen, and I've had the cards tell people things they didn't want to hear. Like I'm thinking of one particular reading I did where this lady was talking about how she was sick of, the city she was living in, all the people, and she wanted to move to this other town. And the cards were basically like, yeah, that's what you really want. But if you do it, it's not going to work out the way you think it is. You're going to end up being more lonely than you were at the beginning. Like, you're not going to be able to make friends at the new town, and things aren't going to work out. And I mean, it didn't, the sad thing was they didn't offer any alternative, right? It's just sort of like, sorry, that's just a bad idea. It's not going to work out the way you want. And there's nothing I could really do about that or provide anything positive other than the cards were just kind of telling her that.
Right.
Right.
It's like rough to hear, but it was, I feel like it was telling her that for a reason. It was maybe saying, hey, you need to buckle down and figure out how to make it work where you are.
That's almost exactly what just happened. So the reading I was mentioning about this house situation, I couldn't seem to do the reading myself. So I went to a friend of mine, a coworker of mine at Magus, and they did the reading. And that exact thing happened. The thing that I was not expecting was, so basically part of the reason that I want to move is so that I have a sort of a change of scenery, because there's a lot of things I need to work on with my, myself, my health and diet, and like a lot of habit stuff, like little stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think, hey, it'd be good to get like a change of pace so I can focus more on that in a fresh environment. And what the cards were saying, and what, makes sense and resonated with me very deep down, is I'm going to do that work here where I'm at right now. I just need to suck it up and do the work. If I go to another place, I'm probably going to get distracted in some ways. And that makes a lot of sense. That's ultimately what I'm going to do. So,
yeah. Yeah, because going to a new place, I mean, the change of scenery can sometimes help, but there's going to be a whole new set of things you have to deal with.
Right.
Yeah. And you risk bringing those bad habits with you and just restarting them at the new place.
Yep. And then you get distracted or sucked into all the little details, like, how am I going to handle my sump pump? Or do I need to install a French drain? Or whatever the details are.
Yeah, exactly. Part of me has always doubted divination, but I've had so many dead-on hits with it. It's one of those things where my brain goes, but it works. Whether you accept it or not, it works.
I think there's something about, and then maybe this is a little out there, but I think there's something to do with encrypting data, right? Like when you are doing any kind of divination, right? You are taking some sort of complex future state, and you are encrypting it into a set of symbols that you're then reading in the here and now. So it maybe and to a degree it's retro-causative, right? You're pulling in something from the future, and it's like doing a reverse sigil, right? And sigil is that, but the inverse, right? You're taking a future state, but you're doing the encrypting yourself and sending it forward into the future to manifest. So like maybe in some ways, divination is almost like the retro-causal manifestation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Interesting.
And there's like something about that process of taking a complex future state of circumstances, like a quantum state, really, and encrypting that data that you even see this in remote viewing, right? Like I'm thinking particularly about associative remote viewing, which is
targets.
Yeah, well, like in associative remote viewing, you're basically trying to figure out if a binary outcome will happen in the future, right? Like will the Patriots, win the Super Bowl, right? And then you have two different images, like whoever, if you're creating the task, right? You would pick one image for the win state and one image for the lose state. And they would be sufficiently different images, right? So they wouldn't be confused for each other. And then you basically just task the group or whoever's doing the associative remote viewing to determine what image they will be shown at on a specific date. Okay, and then they do the remote viewing, and then you have someone analyze it. So a person looks at all the reports and says, okay, well, this one sounds more like this image. This one sounds like more like this other image. And then based on that, you make your bet or, make your determination of what will happen based on whichever got the most hits, right? So if you had a picture of a fire hydrant and a picture of a rabbit and more people saw a rabbit, then you would, bet on whatever outcome you associated with rabbit. And then when the actual thing happens in the future, right? So when the Super Bowl actually happens, you then you provide feedback. So you create a feedback loop where you show all of the people who participated the image that is associated with the actual outcome, right? So like say if they win, that was supposed to be the rabbit. So you show everybody the rabbit. And in a way, like that's almost an obvious example of retro-causality, right? Because you're literally creating like a loop through time where on a future date, they're going to be shown this image. And like that also is like, that's encrypting the data of that future state into an image.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's interesting with the associative remote viewing, I remember one example of it I read a long time ago, was a guy was trying to do some associative remote viewing about some stuff that was supposed to happen on a specific date. And when he was doing the viewing, he just kept seeing an image of like a tower on fire and couldn't understand like when he reported, his findings, like the person was like, well, that, like he didn't get immediate feedback because that would be breaking protocol. But, he reported that's what he saw. So when the date actually came around and he got his feedback, it wasn't, this tower on fire wasn't either one of the images that were part of the test, but it was on 9/11.
Oh.
That's wild.
So what he was seeing was this major event that was rippling through the global consciousness on that date.
Yeah, that almost eclipses it, right? Like emotionally, it eclipses it.
Exactly. Yeah, like that was going to be the most powerful emotional image. And I know we've talked about this on the show before, Seriah, but the experiments with showing people random images and how they were able to determine that specific images, like either of violence or like sexual images. Yeah. People were able to determine them, they would have physiological reactions to them before they actually saw the image, like, microseconds before the image actually appeared on the screen. So it's almost like really intense emotional reactions to certain things can induce this like retro-causality.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always happening, but it's more noticeable when there's an emotional impact behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I know there was an article I read recently about them talking about doing psi research where they were able to, they found that if two people were close, they were better at, like telepathy in the lab than people who weren't, which makes perfect sense. But there's also that emotional component, Yeah.
Well, the word telepathy comes from, telepathos, right? Like sort of feeling pain at a distance. Some of the original experiments with telepathy, or original some of the first written material research about it came from people who had premonitions of loved ones, or had basically been able to tell when a loved one had died. Right? They they knew the moment when someone that they loved was on a trip or something and had died.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that recently, Wren, because I think, oh gosh, it was a show fairly recently. It may have been in one of the Jeff Ritzmann tributes. You had mentioned telepathy and described it like that. And I got to thinking about spirit communication, and not just, I guess, with spirits necessarily, like spirits of the dead, but also with angels or demons or gods or whatever, insert whatever. That it seems very similar. It seems like it's not necessarily physical distance that we're communicating over. It's I guess I don't have a word for it, but it's something more innate or more primal. It's like we're communicating directly into each other via our understanding of emotions.
Oh, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. I don't think I've thought about it like that before.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I get the impression that what we're dealing with. So whenever I've done spirit communication, whether it's been, so I've done it with the spirits of people I've known who passed away, or Angel Cassiel specifically, or a couple different gods or goddesses or planetary intelligences. Every time it's like it happens without words, and it's like you're talking about the physiological responses when people are seeing these images that happen in their brains before they even see the images. It's a similar situation where it's like I feel the emotive meaning of whatever is being said or conveyed, and then my brain translates that into words.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is that what we lost with the confusion of tongues?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, have I told you about Amazon beaming?
No. What is that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this.
I know I've talked about it on the show. It's been a long time.
Okay.
And maybe I've talked about it on Greg Bishop's show. But so Amazon beaming is a super, super interesting novel. It's what's the right word? It's not a memoir, because it's not by the guy who wrote it, but it's like a nonfiction novel about I'm going to blank on the guy's name, but he was the National Geographic photographer, researcher who ended up finding the mouth of the Amazon, right? Like the true source of the Amazon. He's most famous for that. But this book is about this, I think it was 6 months or so of time that he spent with this undocumented Amazonian tribe called the Mayoruna. I think it was the Mayoruna. But it's been a while since I read this book, so I'm blanking on some of the details. But basically, he ends up getting dropped off. He's not able to link back up with the guy who's supposed to pick him up in a few days. And he's trying to, take photographs and stuff of this tribe. So he ends up basically getting lost and living with this tribe for quite some time. And the tribe doesn't speak any English, Portuguese, any language. They have no language at all in common with each other. So he has no way to communicate with them aside from just hand gestures and that sort of thing. And he has this experience of, while he's around the tribal shaman, he has this thing happen to him that he calls beaming, where it's like telepathy, but instead of he has to explain this in the book. He says it's not like I'm hearing words in my head. It's not like I'm hearing the guy's voice. It's almost as if I understand the meaning behind it if I had heard him say it. And it's very close to what you're talking about, Taylor. It's this emotive communication, right? Imagine if the way somebody makes you feel if they told you that they hated you. And then just imagine being able to feel that, but without them actually saying it.
Right.
And he said, like, he thought that his brain was like translating this into, words and what he thought was like the meaning of it, but it wasn't like he was just hearing a voice in his head or something. And he continues to have sort of these like beaming conversations. He calls it beaming with the tribal shaman for a while, until the tribe links up with another group of the tribe that were separate, and a member of that group actually knows some Portuguese, so he's able to communicate with, talk with him. And he asks the guy like about that, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's the old speak, like that's the old speech." Not many of us know how to talk like that anymore, and it's just the old timers who remember how to talk like that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I actually had the exact thought that you did, like a couple of years ago when I was reading this. Like, is this the original way humans communicated with each other? Like, is language something that like disrupts that ability to talk to each other in that nonverbal way?
Right.
I think it must, because language is so like in the realm of air. It's very like mental, very logical process. Whereas what we're talking about is a very like water-driven thing. To borrow some tarot concepts, because it's about the heart. It's about like feeling that like interpersonal connection. And I've never personally experienced this, but I know some people who've explained when they've been tripping on mushrooms together, they feel that they can communicate to each other, or they feel that they know what they're saying or thinking without actually saying any words. And it's, my friends who've explained this have tried to explain it with body language, but they've said like, that's not quite it though. It's not just body language, but that is a part of it.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience in psychedelics with other people as well. It's not just body language. It's more like, and again, it's not like you're hearing their voice inside your head or something. It's not like telepathy like in the movies, but it's like you can just kind of tell what they're thinking, like it's almost like a vibe, like you're picking up on the vibe.
Yep. Well, and so that's actually really interesting. You mentioned telepathy like in the movies. There was some news article or some kind of story that came out a few years back that was something about how people could read your thoughts. They could read what you're thinking without you saying anything, because essentially what they're doing is picking up on subsonic vibrations of the larynx, right? So this internal monologue that we have, that we inside our heads convert into words. We're talking to ourselves in our minds. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes gets manifested as actual vibrations in the vocal cords. And so you can pick that up. If you have a sensitive enough microphone, you can kind of pick up those vibrations. And when I heard that, I was thinking, yeah, but those aren't thoughts. That's just like, I guess the way I would look at it is like a computer is calculating in the background, and what you see with the screen is just the surface level, the projection of what's really going on in the background.
Right.
And what's really going on, all the the machine code or the binary or whatever, that's the emotive stuff. That's the stuff that's more personal. And I wonder, is it because I've experienced it with spirit, I wonder if it's something to do with like the soul or like something like that, as opposed to something physiological.
I mean, yeah, the subsonic vibrations thing, I don't know about all that, but I do know that like movie style telepathy where you actually hear a voice or whatever is something that is possible, at least in spirit communication. And it's something that I've only ever had happen very, very rarely. It's not like rarely as in it happened one time, where I like was doing a conjuration and I heard a voice. It sounded like it was coming from behind me and off to my left, just say out loud, speak. Like that's all it said was speak.
Interesting.
But it startled me because it sounded like someone was in the room. It wasn't like, it wasn't a voice inside my head. Like it sounded like somebody was in the room, standing about 6 feet off behind me and to the left. Like I heard it in my ear. And that was a really interesting experience. I'd love to experiment with it further, but it seems to be pretty difficult to achieve something like that.
Well, that's what happened when I got my name. It was spoken. It was like an external sound, but no one else heard it.
Yeah, I think
heard it
that's totally
audibly.
possible.
What was that?
That's interesting. And you heard it audibly, like with your ears.
Yep.
Okay.
That's happened a handful of times.
I've had something like that once, but I don't think it was audible. I heard a female voice say hello, and I don't know. I guess I always sort of thought of it as, you ever have a situation where you like hear someone call your name or something that it's like it's not really something you heard, but it's like something.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
It was like that, but it was while I was doing some pretty specific meditation.
It's like your brain says, "I just heard this." You go, "You didn't actually hear that."
Right.
I've had numerous occasions where, especially before cell phones, where I'd put the phone down for a minute and go do something and come back, and the person was like, "Who was that woman that just said hello?"
Interesting.
And I'd be like, "So there's no one else here."
Well, I've got a question for you, Seriah.
Yeah.
Speaking of voices, the story where you're laying in bed and this thing starts like crawling into bed with you, and you ask it about, whether your dad hid money in the house.
Yeah.
When that responded and said, like, no, what was that? What was that like? Like, was it audible? Was it in your head?
I'm assuming it was in my head. I think it was a sleep paralysis, thing. It seemed to be audible, but I don't think it was, like, if there was anything recording, I don't think it would have picked up any sound.
Yeah, that's fair. Interesting.
Just, the thing that freaks me out about that is it happens so quickly. Like, I'd lay down and instantly this would occur. And I'm like, I'm not asleep. Like, I'm not even I don't even have a chance to start to change, like, mental state. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Were you paralyzed?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I had to, it's like my body just shut off, like as if the thing was paralyzing me. And once I got it to say no, I was able to pull up the strength to kind of roll over, and then it stopped.
That's just hilarious. I'm sorry. That story is amazing.
Hearing the external voices while in that sleep paralysis state, yeah, that's definitely a thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I've had a ton of those where, like, I've talked about the one on this show where the thing jumped on my back after I stood up out of body. But right before that happened, I kind of felt paralyzed, or, the feeling like your whole body's buzzing. And, I felt someone get into bed behind me, like I was laying on my side. And I started struggling, like, to try to stand up, and I heard, like, a female voice say, like, "No, stay with me. Like, don't leave me.
Right.
Like, stay here with me." And I mean, it sounded just like there was somebody in the room. It wasn't like just, in my head, but it was also in that weird, it's hard to explain the way things feel when you're in that sleep paralysis state, because it's real, but it's also sort of surreal.
Right.
It feels very odd. It's dreamlike. I mean, I think it is sort of like dreaming while awake, but, yeah, those type of experiences, yeah, definitely have had, where it sounds like something is external to me.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anything during sleep paralysis.
Really?
You've never heard, like, people stomping around, opening and closing cabinets?
That drives me nuts.
No, I haven't. But you know what? Now that I think about it, so there was I've had sleep paralysis a few times when I was a kid. And there was one time in particular, I was in my basement on the couch, which is, I think, the only place it ever happened, was on that couch. And I was looking over at the staircase, and there's like a railing, like a wooden railing coming down the stairs. That leads you come right down the stairs, go straight into the laundry room. And I'm in like an adjacent room looking at that, and I'm paralyzed. I could feel myself like totally unable to move. And I watched, this is so dumb. I watched as this like washcloth walked its way down like a slinky on the railing, like flipped end over end all the way down, and then flipped and fell onto the ground. And I feel like I remember there being a noise as it was like making contact with the railing, but I have no idea.
What
That was a long time ago too.
What drives me crazy is not even in the paralysis state, but in that half asleep state where you hear that like footsteps, doors shutting, things like that. And, I'll be like half awake going, there's nobody else here. Is that a real sound? Did I actually hear something? And it's like, and this is partially why I have Wise cams everywhere. So I could just turn them on and be like, nope, there's no one here. Okay, cool.
Yeah, like a common thing for me is to hear, like, almost like there's a party in the house.
Yeah.
So like you'll hear like a bunch of voices that are kind of indistinct, like talking, a laugh here or there, and like the sound of like glasses and plates like clinking and stuff, almost like someone's like preparing dinner.
I've heard of people describing that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Like on different, different stories and stuff that I've heard.
And there are times where I've heard stuff like that, and I'm like, wait, and like my brain will suddenly realize you're the only one in the house. Wake up. And then I'll wake up and everything's dead quiet, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. Yeah, great.
I think the strangest type of encounter I've had like that, I've had a few of these where I'll have the sleep paralysis, and I will somehow know beyond a shadow of a doubt that like usually a pair of people, it's usually two people, are like on their way to my front door, and I know that they're going to come inside and hurt me in some way. And in the couple of times like I've had that experience, it's almost like I can kind of like see them in my head too, on like a security camera, kind of like mind's eye view. So not only do I like kind of like feel like they're coming, I can hear their footsteps and stuff, but I can also kind of like see them coming.
Interesting.
And usually, like I'll wriggle free or get up, before they make it to the door, and then it all disappears and the experience stops. But that like remote control camera view is like something that's really odd.
Huh. Yeah, that is weird.
Do you have cameras like that? Like, I mean, in those positions?
No, I don't have any cameras at all. Like, this has been in a couple different places. Huh. I've had that sensation.
That is interesting.
Yeah, but it's weird. It's not like a perfect like view. It's like I'll get little flashes of like I'll see them, coming up the stairs or something.
Right.
Okay.
It's really odd. Like I think I've had that experience maybe 3 times total over like the last 20 years. So very rarely has that happened, but in that occasion, it's almost like that's a specific narrative that plays out. That's something about these experiences I think is interesting, is like how they tend to follow. It's like it's not as strong as like an archetype or something, but it's like specific narratives that play out. Like the two people coming up the door, the party happening in the middle of the night,
right?
The woman whispering next to my head. Like I've had that happen several times. And it's like almost like the experiences don't deviate too strongly from these like particular scenarios.
Huh.
Yeah, it's I wonder if that is sort of intertwined with the idea of like when you're feeling and watching these people walking up to your door. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing that you're having an emotive response to that, right? Like you're feeling a certain way, anxiety perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah, usually
I wonder. Yeah, exactly. So I wonder, is the narrative tied to that sort of emotion? Yeah. Is it somehow, I don't know, like linked?
Your dreaming mind is sort of creating this fear in a narrative.
Yeah, or like even in some cases hope or maybe FOMO in the case of the parties.
Yeah, I mean, like the party thing in particular, some of these things I can kind of like piece together from like my own past, and like I can remember times being like a little kid and being sick or like taking a nap late in the day, right, and then waking up because my mom is like making dinner, and like I can kind of hear like plates clinking and stuff, and like that wakes me up,
right,
and feeling like that experience then replays itself like in these sleep paralysis, experiences.
Yeah, definitely.
So is it drawing from what we know?
Yeah, I think so.
At times, anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I also wonder how much of that, I guess you could call it like a dictionary of narrative. How much of that is inherent, like in our DNA, or just as humans, that we have this sort of like cosmic story kind of baked into us. Or stories, I guess. But in a specific situation, like your mom preparing dinner or something, that's clearly like that's something that's something you've experienced.
Right.
Yeah, and I feel like like the two people coming to my door, like coming to get me or whatever, that is a very primal sort of just being scared of an animal trying to prey on you in the night, while you're a monkey sleeping in the jungle canopy.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I feel like that's very deeply like ingrained.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
The music is another thing I hear, but not generally when I'm asleep. Like I'll hear it when I'm wide awake, and they'll sound like there's music coming from the other room, and I'll be like, all right, it's just a trick of my ear. And after a while, if like the trick's not going away, I'm going to have to walk in the other room, and then it stops.
Is it ever good music?
I can never quite tell. like it's like music's playing just low enough that you can't quite make it out,
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
But then you go in there and it's dead quiet, and you go back. I go back into the other room, and I don't hear it anymore. And it's like, okay, so what changed? Like if it was some kind of effect, I didn't, like some kind of natural effect, I didn't change anything by going in there. So why am I not still hearing it?
Right.
This is reminding me. I hadn't even thought about this experience in a while, but this happened I think even 2 years ago. It was when we were still living at the duplex, and it's weird because it wasn't necessarily a sleep paralysis experience because I wasn't paralyzed, but we were asleep in bed and I got woken up in the middle of the night because I heard like a car revving its engine in the backyard, like kind of like in the alley behind the house. And I looked out the window and I could see this car just idling in the alley. It looked like a muscle car, it had like the engine kind of above the hood and everything, like an old timey muscle car. And it had its lights on and it was just revving its engine really loud over and over again. And then I just kind of because the bed was right by the window, so all I had to do was kind of sit up and look out the window. And then I don't know, I just felt, okay, time to go back to sleep. And I just laid back down and went to sleep. And the next day I asked my girlfriend, do you remember that car last night that was revving its engine and stuff? 'Cause she's a much lighter sleeper than me. I can sleep through a lot of really crazy noises and stuff. She wakes up if a pin drops in the house. And she was like, no, what are you talking about? There wasn't any car outside last night. And as far as I can tell, that was either some sort of dream or, it felt weird during it, like a sleep paralysis experience, but I wasn't paralyzed during it. But it wasn't quite like a lucid dream either. Have any of you guys had those kind of experiences, like things that felt maybe like a lucid dream, but
yes. Yeah,
weren't?
definitely. Yeah, numerous times. I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but yes, definitely.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of specific things like that. I get what will feel like. Honestly, what it feels like is that I'm awake and I get up and I'll even throw on clothes and then go do something and I'll start my day and then I wake up in bed and I'm like, oh God, I got to do that all again.
yes,
but
definitely.
all the details are there. Everything's so accurate. So I have no idea. Was it when you were seeing this car? Was it did it feel hazy or unspecific, or did it feel like this is my room, this is my window, that's the street down there?
I mean, it felt real. I mean, that's why I was kind of surprised the next day when she said, what are you talking about? There was no car outside in the alley last night.
Right.
That is interesting.
It wasn't necessarily even dreamlike. Other than the fact that I kind of just said, okay, time to go back to it. I know this is odd, and I'm not saying that this was an abduction experience, but it's probably the closest I can think of to when I hear people talk about how during an abduction experience, they kind of just like either go back to sleep or
Yes.
or just like whatever, you know, or not like weirded out by something strange happening in their immediate vicinity. Like that's how it felt to me. Like it wasn't necessarily surreal or even that strange, but I don't know why I just kind of like went, okay, time to go back to bed, and just went back to sleep. Even though like, you know, the car didn't drive off or anything, it was still out there doing it. And I just fell back to sleep.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, speaking of dreams, I have a question for both you guys.
Yeah.
Have you ever dreamed a song that doesn't exist?
Yes.
Like you're hearing a song, and like maybe you wake up with that song stuck in your head, and then you're like, wait a second.
I had an experience where I was actually like I was underground and I heard music like nothing I've ever heard before.
Oh.
And when I woke up, I couldn't even like put it, like it didn't even make sense in my head anymore.
Interesting. Like, was it like lyrics, or was it all very like?
It was more choral.
Ethereal?
It was very ethereal. Yeah.
Okay.
Psyche from Psyche Corporation. One of her songs was written because she dreamed it, and she was sure that she must have heard the song somewhere. So she went looking and realized that the song didn't exist. So she wrote it.
Do you know which song?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of it.
I have Crips and Codes.
It's not a very, very early song. It's one of the first ones she did.
Okay.
I'll have to look it up. I'll let Wren answer while I look it up.
Yeah, I've had that happen a few times. Unfortunately, I'm not really a musician, so it's like I don't know how to like write it down or transcribe it or anything. But I've definitely had a couple. It's a pretty rare thing. Like I can only think of one concrete example because it happened pretty recently, where I, you know, had a dream about a song that didn't exist. It was kind of like an orchestral kind of sounding song, and then waking up and I can't remember how it went now, but I just remember like thinking when I woke up, like that's not a song that exists. And I get the feeling like a lot of musicians probably get songs like that. I mean, I know the Psyche Corporation isn't the only example I've heard of that, where a musician will hear a song in their sleep and then they'll wake up and actually like transcribe it and make a track out of it.
Yeah, I think like someone famous did it. I can't remember who.
Yeah, Paul McCartney with Yesterday.
I was going to say, I thought it was the Beatles.
Yep. Yeah, and that's just, I don't know, that's really interesting to me that happens, because I wonder where that comes from, especially if someone's not a musician, you know, like yourself. Where, you know, is it just piecing something together off of music that you've heard?
So the song was Morpheus version 2.1. There's another version of it, but Morpheus is the song.
Cool, thank you.
I think of it in the sense that this is the way I think about a lot of fiction and creative stuff, is that it kind of all exists out there, you know, like it's all external to us, and we're like paleontologists, right? We're digging up bones, and sometimes that is a laborious process where all you find is like a finger bone or something. And then sometimes you find a whole brontosaurus skeleton.
Right.
But you're kind of pulling. I mean, I think that's how stuff like people who've seen Jodorowsky's Dune, that documentary, and you hear about like Jodorowsky talking about like he kind of the whole Dune story he had in his head, like while Frank Herbert was writing it. You know, so that's why he wanted to direct the movie, and also to Cordwainer. I'm going to mess up his name. I think it's Cordwainer Wright. He wrote this whole novel that is basically exactly the same story as Dune, but just, you know, with all the little details changed. And he and Frank Herbert apparently like wrote their novels at the same time. They didn't talk to each other. There wasn't any cross-contamination there. And I think some ideas, you know, just some stories just exist out there, you know, in the ether or whatever you want to call it. And artists pull that stuff out and then add their own creativity, their own personality to it, right? Because it's not fully baked out there, right? It's just the high notes, right? And you have to add everything in the middle.
Yeah, but even so, where does that come from?
Yeah.
That's a good question. And I think beyond stories too, we can look at, it's Isaac Newton and I want to say Leibniz that both came up with calculus, or both sort of had ideas of like formatting calculus at the same time separately.
Yeah, they did. And I mean, that kind of gets into the territory of like morphic resonance, the Sheldrake thing, where when one human figures out how to do something, suddenly around the world, multiple other humans understand it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why whenever you have an idea, you're probably not the only person who's had that idea. And
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But I think that's like baked into the human condition. Like that's how we work. That's on some level, that's like how we communicate. Like back to that sort of nonverbal emotive telepathy communication. I think the same thing works. It works the same way for ideas.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Well, and so the reason I asked about the dream situation with music, that just happened to me the other day, and it was like this weird dream that had to do with talking about UFOs with a bunch of people who were just like not at all interested. And it was like in a restaurant, and there was this song playing over the radio or something, and it had this very like David Lynch kind of feel to it, like dreamy and sort of weird. And I just remember the lyrics. It was like repeating. It was like, it was like, I want to know what you've been thinking of. I want to know what you've been dreaming of. And just kind of on repeat, sort of like this lofty. And I woke up with that stuck in my head, and I was like, what? What is this? And I Googled it and couldn't find anything.
I've woken up with snippets of songs I know in my head and can't figure out what they are. That can be maddening.
Real songs.
Yeah, they're real songs. I'll just have a snippet of it from the dream, and I'll be like, I know this song. I can't tell you who it is.
That would be maddening. Oh, my God.
It'll just be like a little segment of the song, and maybe not even with words, just the musical part. And I'll be like, yep, that's someone.
Yep. Actually, I have had that, not from a dream, but I've had that with a couple songs. I one of them in particular, I think, was a Nine Inch Nails song, and I don't think I ever figured out what it was. But yeah, that's crazy.
The one I remember ended up being a Dawkins song that I hadn't heard in ages, and I'm like, I don't know why. I'm like, is it Dawkins? And I like started flipping through songs. I'm like, there it is. It was Dawkins.
That actually kind of gets at something else that I'm really interested in, which is memory. Because you must have heard it at some point, right? And that's
yeah. No, I like Dawkins. I just hadn't listened to it in a long time.
Yeah. So how that kind of stuff can get lodged in our memories and come back very fully sometimes.
Yeah.
How does that happen? I don't know. Do we really hold on to things in that much detail for so long? I've had that happen with with a song as well. It was a artist from Minneapolis called Dark Dark Dark, and one of their songs popped into my head. I had listened to their whole album back when I was in high school, and then completely forgot about it. Totally forgot that band existed, and last year it showed up again. I don't know, where what are your guys' thoughts on memory?
Memory's associative, so I mean, wherever memory is actually stored, and it may not be the brain, I don't necessarily think it is completely in the brain. It's sort of holographic and associative. So something triggered that memory of something that you haven't thought of in a long time.
What do you mean by holographic?
That all pieces contain the whole.
Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the holographic universe theory is that every fragment of a hologram contains a lesser quality version of the whole.
Really, like a fractal.
Right.
I guess I never made that connection before. That's interesting.
So we're almost out of time. Taylor, you said that you're working on a podcast?
Yes, I am. It's not up yet, but it will be at some point. Hopefully within the next month or two. I'll be posting the first few episodes. I think the name is going to be the Green Lion Podcast, but I might change it to Philosophy of the Strange, but we'll see. But yeah, basically my plan is to go through philosophical ideas relating to, things in Forteana or, psychology, the paranormal, I guess all these fields that we're all sort of interested in, and try to look at them through more kind of specific lenses, like philosophical lenses. So analyze, the ethics of certain situations, or try to talk about things from an epistemological lens, like how do we know about these various things or whatever. So at some point that will be a thing.
And where can people follow you anywhere?
Not easily.
All right.
I'm not really active on social media.
Okay, I just want to see if there was a way where are you going to announce the podcast and such.
That's a good question.
Right.
I'm gonna definitely mention it on the Kickstarter page in the updates. But other than that, greenlionpublishing.com. But that's a very much work in progress website.
Okay. All right. And your tarot deck again can be found where?
Yeah, that's sigilarcanum.com. SIGILARCANUM.com.
Okay, you guys want to continue this in the Patreon segment?
Sure, I'm down.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you both for being on, and we'll continue to have this conversation as a Patreon.
Thank you.
So here I want to thank all of my Patreons. Without you, this show would probably not be a reality. But I especially want to thank those who are pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Eric Hervin, Tim, Ad Noctum, Patricia Gaia Quinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andy McNamara, Barbara Fisher, Becky Trainer, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limita, Charles Davis, Chris Ernst, Craig Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, Empty K, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Janet Bunderson, Jennifer Campbell, Joanna Rojas, Jose A., Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Jim and Sophie, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matthew Sproul, Maddie, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sheeran, Sedgter, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor, 36 Dingo, Vincent Treewell, Walker, Will Powell, William Lovelace, and Stephen D. Thank you all so much for your support. As we mentioned there is a Patreon-only segment that'll be coming out later this week. If you want to help out the show and become a patron, $3 a month is all it is, and you get extra content with almost every show. And you can find the link at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. All right, I've been meaning to do this for a while, and I always get the show done and then realize I didn't do it again. I wanted to shout out to a few people who made some very, very kind donations over the last few months. Dominic Farinasi, Dan Skimahorn, David Boer, Bryn Morgaine, and Gary Schrank. And if you don't want to be a patron and you just want to throw some money to help out, there is a link for PayPal at the website as well. There's also a link for merch if you want to get a t-shirt or a poster or a mug, a pillow, all kinds of crazy stuff on there. And it's all good quality stuff. A couple of logos from Timothy Renner and a couple from the late Jeff Ritzman. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. And I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.